As many people know, I'm a big fan of professional wrestling, and as soon as I say professional wrestling, I can feel that some people will roll their eyes at the mere mention of it. That the idea of something so meaningless could be so impassionate to others just astounds so many, which leads a lot of wrestling fans and a lot of people asking the same question that I am today. Why do so many discredit professional wrestling? The most common theme spread around the disdain for wrestling comes from what wrestling terminology refers to as the F word, fake. By calling something fake, it is referring to that it is no longer mattering. Wrestling is predetermined. There is a script that they follow, not necessarily to a T, but at least the outcomes. Who wins, who loses, but the audience is none the wiser to these outcomes. So, in a sense, it's really playing out as we're seeing it. There are also instances where circumstances will happen within these matches and within these realms of storytelling that are unforeseen, much like any production. However, wrestling is very different because, unlike, say, a movie or a TV show, wrestling is very much on a tripwire of anything can go wrong. They very much can do instances of playing it by ear. Each promotion is different, each writer is different, and each outcome is very different. They can take the conceptions that we, the audience, experience and change the narrative as they go along. Change the stories. See who is and isn't popular. It is very different than any other product because of the fact that audience themselves are participating in that time transition. The circus is the theatricality, the over-the-top abundance of characters and phenomenal, overt, and often goofy things. But for every character involving clown makeup, there will be those characters who you could legitimately see winning fights. You could see if you were in a scenario where you needed a backup to help you within a brawl amongst others, you could see this individual as being that person who could back you up in said fight. This isn't based off of any actual proof of being in a fight with this person. This is based off of your perception of how they're presented. It goes a long way. Just like in a circus, there are many different performers. There's lion tamers, clowns, acrobats. Wrestling is very much in that same realm. There are goofy characters, there are high flyers, there are a massive amount of strongmen, and there are the ringleaders, the orchestrators or the bookers, the ones who make the matches, who make the product the best shows that they possibly can. Some are not as good as others, but their goals are identically the same. You go from one circus to the next, it will be very different. Just like you go from one promotion to the next, it will be very different. Similar, but different. This circus template is created so that way the audience is immediately transfixed on what they are seeing, much like the circuses of old. Wrestling still has that same mindset of forcing the audience to want to see more. That is the key to all pro wrestling. Professional wrestling as a whole is a theater of pain. And when I say that, I am not discrediting wrestling. I am stating a fact. People often compare pro wrestling to things like basketball, football, or any other sporting event. But in actuality, other sporting events focus more on point systems. They focus more on who's the better of the two, which wrestling does as well. But the overall point of wrestling as a whole is to put on the best show, put on the best product. For instance, championships in wrestling are presented less as an actual trophy compared to other sporting events, as they are to a story-driven device, something that is grander to the scale of their storytelling. In actuality, those championships matter, but they matter more to the audience, more to the credibility of the professional wrestler, more to the company as a whole. When someone in the professional wrestling industry goes, I am an X amount of champion, that adds credibility to them as opposed to saying, this person is really, really good. Because anyone can just say, I'm very, very good, and then disappoint others. But when you have the actual credibility of saying such, it is very similar to how an actor will talk about the directors, the writers, the producers, the companies that they've worked for. These are credentials that other people can look at. This person is worthy to be on our show. The most important part of professional wrestling is the athleticism, but just as important is the overall product, the storytelling, the characters. This comes from their different adaptabilities, be it their mic work, interactions, in-ring work, or all three. Ultimately, it comes down to what these individuals can do that no one else can do. By the storytelling and the characters throughout professional wrestling, we, the audience, gain a more respect towards the individual through the character. One of the most famous professional wrestlers of all time was The Undertaker. He was presented as just this guy who's this immortal zombie being of a caretaker. And on paper, that's ridiculously silly. But the way they presented him, his dominance, his fear, his simple mannerisms, his in-ring work, his mic work, his manager, his image, every single thing hit the perfect notes. He had a long historied career where he changed his character just enough, but it's the same core pro wrestler that when he eventually retired, we, the audience, felt a sense of bittersweet happiness. By the time he had retired, some may say he overstayed his welcome, but in reality, he had such a huge passion for this industry, he couldn't let it go. And I think deep down, we can all kind of relate to that same feeling. And that's the hardest thing for us as individuals, when we grow so attached to something that we care about. Just something that we have this grown attachment to, we do not want to say goodbye. Unfortunately, time doesn't wait for anyone, and we all have to eventually say goodbye to something we love. So why do so many discredit professional wrestling? I think it comes down to people just not wanting to accept it. For one reason or another, it's the stigma that because it is scripted, because it is predetermined, that everything they do is irrelevant. And I say that from experience of knowing professional wrestlers that it hurts. It hurts them to hear someone say wrestling is fake. Because by saying that, it's saying that everything they've ever accomplished, everything they've put into this industry, and everything that they will put into this industry is irrelevant. That they, as individuals, do not matter. When in reality, they're doing more than almost any other entertainer can possibly do. They have to be great interviewers, mic workers. They need to know the wrestling industry. They have to work, travel, leave their families, be interviewed, do everything they can to keep you entertained, and at the sacrifice of their own personal lives and their own personal health. Whether or not people like wrestling is irrelevant. I feel that to discredit the wrestling industry would be to discredit every sort of media as a whole, which is unfair to not only the individuals, but the industry itself. But maybe sometimes they just need to experience it in order to understand it. But in the end, these aren't answers. They are hypotheticals.
Wake the up, samurai. We have a city to burn.